You know, some puzzles are designed not to be solved, but to entirely consume anyone who dares to try. Today's explainer requires a slightly different approach from what we usually do. What we're about to explore is a sequence of events so chilling and so meticulously structured that it continues to haunt investigators to this very day. So settle in, follow the evidence with me, and listen closely. Now, just to set the stage here, and I want to be totally upfront, the case we are about to reconstruct is an original, fictional story. But the methodology, the dead ends, and the truly terrifying realizations, those are going to be presented exactly as they would unfold in real life. We're going to treat every forensic anomaly and every psychological turning point with the utmost seriousness. We'll walk through the evidence step by step, using the exact same procedures a seasoned detective would rely on to crack a cold case. The investigation begins with a very simple transcript. 911, what is your emergency? Hello? Is someone there? Then, just static. A confused operator, a completely silent room on the other end of the line. I mean, we've all heard emergency calls before, right? But what makes this one so terrifying isn't what's being said. It's the total, suffocating absence of the person who dialed. It raises these immediate urgent questions. Who called? Why couldn't they speak? And honestly, what were they looking at when that phone finally connected? Chapter 1, October 14th, 3 a.m. Picture a quiet suburban street. The doors are locked, the alarm system is armed. Our first subject receives a phone call in the dead of night. They wake up, they answer, and then they just simply cease to be there. When police actually arrived, they found zero forced entry, no signs of a struggle. The victim's wallet and keys were still sitting right there on the nightstand. Just an empty house and a phone left off the hook. So naturally, investigators pull the digital phone records. They weren't looking for a ghost, they were just looking for a basic lead. A suspect, a telemarketer, maybe a wrong number. Instead, they found what network engineers ended up calling the impossible number. This was a caller ID sequence confirmed by telecom companies, police databases, and even federal agencies to have literally never existed. It wasn't spoofed, it simply defied the basic architecture of our communication grids. It was a digital phantom. But it's when you look at the timestamps that the real terror kind of sets in. Look at this data. Subject A gets called at 3 a.m., vanishes at 3:07 a.m. Subject B gets a call at 11:14 p.m., vanishes at 11:21 p.m. 7 minutes. Every single victim vanished into thin air exactly 7 minutes after answering that impossible number. This wasn't random at all. It was a highly calculated countdown. So, where did they go? I want us to just sit with that question for a second, because this is the exact question that slowly began to break the lead detective on this case. It's one thing to have a typical missing person case, right? You look for tire tracks, you pull security footage, you track their credit cards. It is another thing entirely to have a mathematical certainty of their disappearance, but with absolutely zero physical trajectory. How does a human being just evaporate from a locked room in exactly 420 seconds? Detectives obviously tried to break this down logically, but standard theories just kept collapsing one by one. No bodies recovered, no ransom demands made, no signs of forced entry. And perhaps the most frustrating part for the police, no known connections between the victims. I mean, they were different ages, worked in completely different professions, lived in different parts of the city. Their final moments were completely, beautifully ordinary, right up until the second that phone rang. When the physical evidence literally evaporates, investigators have to go back to the digital dust, evidence box 402. They subpoenaed deep server phone logs, scrubbed deleted voicemails, and practically pulled apart the very code of the victims' digital lives. It was exhausting, painstaking work. They were just desperately looking for any microscopic residual trace of that 7-minute window. They needed an anchor, something tangible to hold on to. But what they found only deepened the dread. On a partially corrupted voicemail recovered from Subject B's phone network, audio engineers managed to isolate a profile. Heavy static, followed by this rhythmic, mechanical, clicking sound. Kind of like a metronome counting down, just buried under layers of thick electronic noise. It provided absolutely zero answers. It really just proved that someone, or something, was listening on the other end. So, if the digital trail is a total dead end, we have to ask, what lies beneath? Where is the physical anchor for an impossible digital signal? Well, investigators eventually traced a faint, highly localized electromagnetic bounce. Basically, a tiny anomaly in the city's power grid that triggered during the exact moments of the disappearances. This was a huge breakthrough. It finally gave them a geographical coordinate. And that electrical trace? It led them here, an abandoned emergency communication center, out on the dark, industrial edge of town. It had been shuttered decades ago. No power, no active lines, just dust, rusted metal, and pure silence. Police methodically breached the building, sweeping it room by room with flashlights. They were fully expecting to find a squatter, or maybe a makeshift server farm illegally tapping into the old copper wires. Instead, deep down in this forgotten, windowless underground level, they stumbled into an archive. Dusty evidence boxes, decades-old cassette tapes, all carefully cataloged by date, faded victim files pinned meticulously to corkboards. But the most chilling detail in that room wasn't the files. It was an empty chair, placed perfectly in the absolute center of the room, facing a blank wall. Just waiting for someone specific to sit in it. Finding this underground room completely changed the investigation. The main question instantly shifted from how did they disappear to who were they to each other. Investigators started cross-referencing the victims' lives, but not in the present day, decades in the past. They had to peel back layers of incredibly believable red herrings, old financial records, past addresses, distant relatives, just to find a single, deeply buried, unifying thread. And that unifying thread was buried 20 years in the past. 20 years ago, a localized structural disaster claimed multiple lives. It was this massive tragedy that dominated the headlines for weeks. 15 years ago, the statute of limitations expired with 0 prosecutions, all thanks to some massive bureaucratic loopholes. And present day, the disappearances? It turns out every single victim had played a minor, seemingly inconsequential role in approving the faulty permits for that exact structure. This realization hit the investigative team like a bucket of ice water. This was not a series of random events. It was profoundly human, and it was deeply personal. Someone spent 20 years preparing for this. 2 whole decades sitting in the shadows, mastering legacy telecommunications, physically tracking these individuals, building a ghost network out of abandoned infrastructure, and just waiting for the absolute perfect moment to execute this meticulously calculated revenge. The raid, 11:43 p.m. Realizing the architect of this entire nightmare was very likely still operating out of that facility, the lead detective immediately ordered a full tactical raid on the abandoned communication center. They completely flooded the underground archive with tactical lights. Heavily armed officers swept every single corridor, desperately hoping to catch the suspect before the next 7-minute window could open up. But when they breached that final room, the suspect was gone. The files were entirely stripped from the corkboards. The cassette tapes had vanished. The only thing left in the exact center of that cold concrete room was an old rotary telephone, unplugged, sitting completely alone on a bare metal table. And then right in front of a dozen armed officers, it started ringing. The entire room went completely, terrifyingly silent. The lead detective, ignoring all standard protocol and the hushed warnings of his team, slowly walked up to the table. He picked up the heavy plastic receiver. He placed it to his ear. And through the static, a calm, deeply familiar mechanical voice simply said, "You have 7 minutes." Exactly 7 minutes later, in a sealed underground room, completely surrounded by his own heavily armed officers, the lead detective vanished. No trace, no hidden doors, no logical explanation whatsoever. Just an empty room and a dangling phone cord swinging slightly in the dead air. I'm going to leave you with this final haunting question to take away from our explainer today. What really happened to the detective?